I am Kristin Regina, the Director of the Library and Archives at the Philadelphia Museum of Art.
I'm Karina Wratschko. I'm the Digital Initiatives Librarian at the Philadelphia Museum of Art. And we're the administrative team for NDSR Art. So this is a project that we have had IMLS funding for. And we're partnering with the Art Libraries Society of North America. Did I get it? It's libraries, not librarians. Yeah. Art Library Society of North America on this program.
We have 4 residents on stage who will be representing themselves, presenting their own work, but I'll just quickly go down the line. Erin Barson at the Minneapolis Institute of Arts, Kate Peebles at the Yale Center for British Art, Coral Solomon at University of Pennsylvania, and Elise Tanner at Philadelphia Museum of Art. And Elise has been under the weather, so I think someone will represent her voice if she's not. But basically, what is NDSR? NDSR is called, it stands for National Digital Stewardship Residency. And it's a program that started at the Library of Congress in 2013. And basically, it was an IMLS-funded partnership with the Library of Congress to start to bring digital competencies into digital preservation competencies to libraries. It's based on, I'll jump ahead a little bit, it's based on the digital preservation and outreach education model called DEPO. And so basically, Library of Congress also had this DEPO model for train the trainer. Some people may have experienced it or done it. But basically, they would come and they would teach you about the 4 principles of digital preservation: how you identify, how you select, store, protect. Oh, it's more than 4. But the key pieces of digital preservation, they would then do these train the trainers where they would go into the neighborhoods, they would go to local institution, and then it was your job to get a certification as a trainer and then take it back to your institution and continue to spread the news of the tenets for digital preservation. So that program was a success, which I'm going to go back to NDSR. Which is why Library of Congress then was able to create this project of taking, for National Digital Stewardship Residencies, taking these tenets of the Train the Trainer model and DEPO, and then going out and taking newly graduated library students and giving them kind of like a postdoc, or like in the nursing or professional medical professions, giving them an opportunity, hey, you've got this degree, but you need something more than just a fellowship. This is, you are embedded, you are going to senior management team meetings, you are a key part of the institutional process, and you are there to change process, you're there to change workflow, and to bring the idea of digital preservation into the new core of the institution.
Sure, so what this illustration on the left shows is all of the iterations that have come through for previous NDSR programs, starting with the pilot in 2013 by the Library of Congress. So there have been programs run out of Boston and New York, and some of them overlap. There's ours is a distributed cohort, as you notice from where they are located, and we have one more year coming up. You see the following year, we actually pushed back our launch since they made this graph, but we'll have another residency starting in 2018. But that document comes from a CLEAR report called Keepers of the Digital Future. So if you'd like to read more about NDSR programs, that's a good way to get a well-rounded perspective on what everyone has been through.
CLEAR, by the way, is the Council for Library and Information Resources, and sometimes you'll see projects that they will push out for digitizing hidden collections. It's a good place to look for funding. It's Mellon supported. But basically, you have this core tenet of digital preservation, and a lot of those cohorts were based in Washington. So it'd be so an institution applies to be a host. They then have their project, they've been vetted, then there's a call for applicants. The applicants go and get embedded at that institution. So the first year was Washington, all 4 or 5, sometimes there's more. They were always in DC. Then the next year they were all in New York. They were all in Boston. So our idea for NDSR Art was to bring digital preservation to the arts and cultural heritage communities and start to have a conversation and a dialogue about digital preservation. And so partnering with ARLIS, the Art Library Society of North America, we proposed to have more of a distributed cohort. The AAPBH, the public broadcasting, they have had a distributed cohort for public broadcasting institutions around the country. Biodiversity Heritage from Smithsonian is a distributed cohort. And so with ARLIS, the idea was to distribute the cohort, but working with a society. So working with a group to then embed people into an organization. Another piece is to do mid-career mentorship and professional development. So really helping the person with whom the resident is embedded, having that professional, whether it's a librarian, an archivist, a museum professional, anybody could have the opportunity to, they too would get the digital preservation kind of training, and then also a new opportunity to expand their own portfolio. We're embedded with the Professional Development Committee of ARLIS. These were the applications that we had on last year's hosts. And this is actually when two of the Philadelphia cohort, they were attending the local ARLIS chapter meeting last month. And so the idea is that these residents are embedding themselves within the local ARLIS chapters. They're embedding themselves in ARLIS National, and then they're also embedding themselves in your institution. And so hopefully it's a three-pronged approach to bringing these preservation conversations to a wider community.
Yeah, so, and I think that, let us know if you're having questions about the lingo, because this program is, it has so much vocabulary, but you'll notice we're calling them a cohort. And then we have host mentors who are their primary, you could almost call them a supervisor, but you want them to be so much more than that, which is why we consider them a host and a mentor. And then there are additional mentors. So we have Craig here, who's an ARLIS mentor, and Craig Binkowski from Yale Center for British Art. Francis Lloyd Baines from MIA is Aaron's primary mentor. And we also have Douglas Hegley, who is very much a mentor for Aaron as well. So.
Yeah.
I just have a clarification question. When you're talking about digital, are you talking about using digital to preserve non-digital art, or are you talking about preserving the digital files, or both?
Both.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you, that's the next slide.
Yeah. So for this thematic and distributed NDSR program, we are focusing on both. So this is an illustration of the time-based media that Aaron and Elise can talk about more, but how they are working collaboratively across their institutions to build programs to preserve these materials. As well as the digital publications, everything from the OSCE projects, the interactivity that we're building in-house, learning how to preserve those pieces, and then also the published material, so we know that, if a publisher were to go away, that we still have access to that scholarly material in the future, as well as the gallery interactives and our in-house productions.
From a library and art librarian's perspective, it's very important, like Karina was saying, digital publications, the OSCE projects, any digital publication, how is that going to be presented in our library catalogs in 2 years, let alone in 5 or 10 years? All the apps and all the really great interactives that this community primarily does, how are those going to still be around or be presented or shown in our museums and institutions? Social media, that's a moment of our history, and so maybe we're lucky enough that 1 or 2 institutions captured it. Maybe somebody grabbed it on the Internet Archive. But the long and the short is, how is the material that everybody in this room is creating and generating in the Cultural Heritage Society, how is that going to be saved? And so that was one of our primary thrusts as well, of bringing that content to, not just to bringing digital preservation to this community and just to start to have these conversations, but bringing those ideas of, hey, there's apps and there's software and there's programs, bringing that back to digital preservation. because so much of the digital preservation community is library focused. They don't deal with the visual. And so it was also to try to remind them, hey guys, we're over here and our stuff is really complicated. So we put the call out last year, and we had about 15 applicants. And of those, we boiled it down to, we have an advisory board, and we had some very long conversations with them because we were also training a board, which a lot of digital preservation people, a lot of straight library people that didn't understand the nuances of the art community. And so we were educating these leaders on the digital preservation side about what looked like a good project probably and what didn't. And so in the end, we came up with these 4 sites and ultimately the 4 residents that you see here. And we're going to let them talk a bit about their institution and their projects. So, Erin?
First. Yeah.
And just click that guy.
Okay. All right, great.
Here's your microphone.
All right. Hello. So I am Erin Barson. I am the resident at the Minneapolis Institute of Art, and my host mentor is Frances Lloyd Baines. My project is managing time-based media and digital art at an appropriate scale. A little bit about me, I have my library science master's. I got it in 2015. So I'm a librarian / archivist, but the work that I'm doing at MIA is actually not embedded in the library. I'm working in the media and technology division. And so I guess before I go any further, just quickly, I would say when I'm talking about time-based media art, that means any work of art that has duration is an element and depends on technology. Shorthand usually it means art that needs to be plugged in most of the time. And so at MIA we have, currently we only have 22 objects in our collection, but we are growing. When my residency position was created, to the time I actually started, our collection grew 10%, so we went from 20 to 22. And we have some curators that are really interested in acquiring more of this work. And it ranges from fully analogs, such as the slideshow here on the far left, to sort of a combination of analog and digital. So we have some like sculptural, like audio installation with sort of a sculptural component, to completely digital, such as like the digital projection or the HD video that's being displayed. And so essentially, currently, this work is being treated the same way as physical works of art. So when a piece comes in, it gets a number and gets put away in a cabinet just as if it was a physical work. And so the unique nature, digital nature of them is not being addressed. And furthermore, even if we did start to address that and make extra copies and digitize things, we don't really have any sort of system in place to manage and ensure that long-term preservation. So my project is essentially to come up with a framework to figure out how to manage and preserve our time-based media art collection now, but also accounting for growth. And but this also includes developing new policies and procedures and systems and putting those in place and workflows, and also researching and recommending technical solutions as well. And I think that's about it. Thanks. I am also now speaking on behalf of Elise Tanner, who has no voice.
Hi. As you can hear, I can't really talk, so Erin has volunteered to read what I would have said to you.
Here, you can stand here and smile, and I will and click the slide over, and I'll do this. It goes, just hit this to the right when you're ready. You have 2 slides. All right. I am Elise now. The Philadelphia Museum of Art has approximately 100 time-based media art pieces in its permanent collection, including born digital, digitized, and analog media. Notable artists include Vito Acconci, Les Levine, Steve McQueen, Bruce Nauman, and Bill Viola. Since 2012, the museum has acquired 30 time-based media works, 15 of those in 2016 alone. The time-based media art collection is the fastest-growing collection at the Philadelphia Museum of Art. In the summer of 2017, 2 leaders in the field of time-based media conservation, Mona Jimenez and Martha Singer, conducted a comprehensive assessment of the PMA's time-based media collection. This is where Elise comes in. With the recommendations from the assessment in hand, as the NDSR art resident at the PMA, Elise is building the foundation for the preservation and ongoing management of the time-based media art collection. More specifically, she is performing extensive research and interviewing relevant stakeholders, and then compiling that information into useful documentation and executable actions. These include to minimize the loss of the existing time-based media collection, to collaborate with IIT to customize TMS to fit time-based media metadata/documentation needs, to create written policies, standards, workflows, templates, and documentation, and to design an executable plan to establish a media conservation workstation in the Conservation Department. Thus far, Elisa's work has been an exploratory process as she becomes familiar with the museum, the collection, and managing the project. She's excited to begin actively conserving this vulnerable collection in the coming months.
Thank you.
Hi guys, my name is Coral Salomon. I am at the University of Pennsylvania's Fisher Fine Arts Library working on the project titled To Capture and Keep, Establishing Preservation Practices for Born Digital Art Collections and Projects. Before coming to Penn, I was working at the Frick Collection as a web archiving fellow and as an assistant to the digital archivist at the Center for Puerto Rican Studies. So the Fisher Fine Arts Library services a lot of different departments centering around the arts and design at Penn, and also different galleries and museums within the Penn community. So my project has 3 components. A web archiving component for the fine arts, so establishing a web archiving program for Penn that tackles very dynamic and visual content that's difficult to capture, that's inherent to the fine arts. Also establishing repository recommendations for born digital artworks and art documentation. And the final portion is writing a white paper on acquiring publications released as apps, YouTube videos, podcasts, content that's tricky to capture, and there are really no acquisition practices established yet, but it's really important to conserve and have available because a lot of cutting edge content is being released on these platforms. So as of now, I'm still in the exploratory phase, and it's been really interesting interviewing the different stakeholders at Penn. And yeah, if you have any questions or have any recommendation, if you're working on similar projects, especially in regards to preserving VR and augmented reality components, please let me know because I'd love to talk to you. Thank you.
Hi, can you hear me? Is that all right? I'm Kate Peebles. I'm the resident at the Yale Center for British Art. And before this residency, I got my MLIS at the University of Pittsburgh last summer in 2016. And I've worked as a processing archivist at the Heinz History Center and at the Carnegie Museum of Art. So in New Haven, my position is part of the institutional archive, and my project focuses on the preservation of born digital permanent collection records that are created by museum departments outside of the archive. So the center is the largest collection of British art outside of the UK, and it includes tens of thousands of artworks and rare books, which means that behind these objects is a lot of documentation, which is an essential and valuable part of their existence. And my project is to share archival practices and digital preservation tools with museum staff to develop a new system that cares for these permanent collection records that are considered permanently active and are never sent to the archive. So my project involves working with curators, conservators, the registrar, and rare books and manuscripts. I have been interviewing curators to kind of establish their current practices and learn about what goes into the object files, what's created digitally now, and how we can save vulnerable records from being lost. And with the conservators, we look at the conservation reports that are now being created digitally. And another component of my project will be to create a proposal to integrate TMS with our digital preservation system, Preservica. And so far, along with the interviews, I've been learning about TMS and Preservica and researching database preservation, and metadata. So my next steps will be to take what I've learned from these interviews and to test potential filing systems in Preservica and develop workflow that will become part of the staff's jobs. And ultimately, along with the new workflows that will help staff ensure the preservation of our objects' provenance and permanent collection documentation, I will write a policy and create the proposal for TMS integration with Preservica, and hopefully create my own documentation, which I can then share with the museum community at large. And if anyone has questions or would like to talk to me about the project, I'd be happy to do so in the hall. So thank you.
So this is our website and our URL. So you can follow along with the residents as they complete their year-long residency. So they will be closing their residencies in July, and we'll be seeing some project updates from them in their blog throughout the year.
Do you have any questions for us? Thank you. Yeah.
Have you, any of you worked with the Smithsonian Digitization Office?
No.
I know that they're, at least I work in the 3D scanning space, which is.
The question, I'm sorry, the question was, has anybody reached out to the Smithsonian Digitization Office?
So they're really ahead of the game. We're a 3D scanning company, so 3D scanning data is, I assume, more digital data is what you're talking about. And I know some of the projects we've done, the art is the data, and then the physical thing that's made from the data is a representation of the data. So I know the Whitney's doing this, but specifically, the Smithsonian, I could put you in touch with the people. They're doing a tremendous amount of work to set these tables and put these processes in place within their organization, and they really want to do it on the grand level. So I can help you guys with that.
That would be great. I will say that the Smithsonian is one of the leaders in the field in terms of establishing workflows for time-based media art preservation, and they have a lot online. And I know that Elise and I are both have looked a lot at their documentation in terms and figuring out how to adapt and scale it to the specific needs of both of our institutions.
How much of what you're doing is touching on 3D data, or is it really mostly,
The question is about 3D data.
or is it mostly video and?
Well, I will try to answer. I haven't yet, but a curator, the curator's assistant, just asked me this last week about how to preserve 3D, the files. So that's my project next week. So.
And I think you hit on, this like dealing with Smithsonian. Absolutely, they're leading the way. But another point of this project and the idea is to hopefully share what big institutions are doing and to remind smaller institutions or mid-size that, oh yeah, we've got to be handling this, whether it's time-based media, whether it's your software app, whether it's just it's your data that's no longer printed out and put into a curatorial file, but it's actually now being created electronically. And so, the whole point of this is just to start to stir the pot and start to have some more dialogues and conversations. There's a question in the back corner.
That's a great question, and the question is, what will the TMS Preservica integration look like? And that's the project, really, is to figure out options, and maybe it won't be a complete integration, maybe partial integration, or capturing the TMS data in another way. So that's what I'm working on.
And remember,
keep you posted.
Yes, this is, hopefully we get it there, and Craig is in the room. It's a first stab at trying to get it out there. Yep.
Can you talk a little bit more about the distributed cohort system and how it works for you and working with the societies to get those embedding?
Question is about a distributed cohort and embedding with the society. Arliss has local chapters, and so the request for the host applicants was that they reach out to, if they didn't have already a contact in place with the local chapter, and most of the applicants didn't, which to us is okay because we want to bring those communities together. But it was to find a local RLIS mentor at the very least as a contact point. And so because they're distributed, they can't just go out to happy hour if somebody's had a bad day that Friday. I know, hopefully you guys maybe have virtual drinks together.
Yeah, we have virtual happy hours.
They're on Slack. What other communication?
I would say we mostly communicate by Slack, and we communicate just about every single day. You know, even if it's just, sometimes it's to vent and say like, oh, I'm buried in metadata. And sometimes it's like, oh, does anyone know about this? Or, you know, and asking questions to each other. And we also have shared Trello boards where we exchange resources that we've found helpful that they might find helpful, which is sort of I think, an easier way of communicating than just emailing back and forth all the time.
And now we're also starting to travel together. We're going to conferences and meeting up around the country,
Yeah,
which has been great.
Yeah, last week Erin hosted us at Minneapolis and organized a wonderful panel on related to her project and did lots of education there. So we're trying to have points where we can meet up with each other throughout the year. And we'll be at Yale in spring.
Yes.
Will there be another cohort next year, and how would people apply?
So the host applications have already come in for next year, but the people can apply for the residency. We'll pull out the call for residents in January, and as you can see, it's for recent graduate students, so you should be within 2 years of a program, and you don't have to be an MLIS student. It could be for anyone, but it's for early career, new professionals, yeah.
And unfortunately, this is our second. We were only funded for 2 years of residence, of cohorts, but I know that IMLS is working with CLEAR to think about what is the sustainability of this program and how can it be reinvented. Library of Congress just finished off their last cohort as well. But if you have an idea for one, apply for an IMLS grant. They're always open to it, and they're really interested in the idea of continuing education and professional development.
Are you primarily looking for hosts that have projects that are starting from kind of nothing to building processes, or can it be at a certain point in the process of kind of?
The more successful projects, the board tends to like projects that are already established. They liked PMAs because the assessment of the time-based media was going to be done. They liked MIAs because there was already a strong culture of support and integration, and that it was going to be a project that would succeed, and that it wouldn't just, once the resident left, you're done. The institution swept it under the rug. The idea is that this is something that the institution maybe started to think about or has been thinking about it, but how are we going to get this done? And so the resident is able to come in and energize the institution or the department. But I mean, I shouldn't say department. I mean, it's meant to be cross-institutional and to bring an opportunity to push something forward that the institution will then continue to take on. Yes.
So you talk a little bit about how the fellows can communicate. And I noticed that a lot of the institutions are kind of in the northeast. Was geographic proximity, did that play into the decision? And the next cohort, will that be something that you would layer
We want so much to spread the cohorts across the country as much as possible, but I think that a learning lesson for us in launching the program was that the people in like Boston and New York and DC, they are familiar with the NDSR brand. So it was easier to get them to mobilize and apply. And so we had to do a lot more training and outreach to people to let them know what it is. So I think that we have some more diversity this year, but I think we need to keep on working on sharing.
We would love to have nobody in the Northeast. And it was actually a very difficult, optically, how does that look? For Philadelphia Museum of Art is the host administrator, and then to also have a project embedded at the institution. That's something that the board carefully considered. But in the end, they went with the 4 best projects that were also going to be the 4 best experiences for the resident, with and what's going to make a good cohort. Because in the end, you could have a really great project, but if the 4 projects aren't complementary, if they weren't going to be able to support each other, and the fact that there's 2 time-based media's projects in here, we also, the board, like you said, the board felt that it was going to help the residents, and I hope it has, that you guys, it's such a complex issue that you guys were able to lean on each other and can continue to like learn from one another, even though the projects are at 2 different places. But diversity and inclusivity we would love to have it out of the East Coast.
Well, I think we're out of time, so thank you all for joining us and having us here. Thanks.